So I'm delighted to introduce Adam Stanbury. Adam is the Head of Employer Solutions at the CIPD, and this afternoon we'll be enjoying a deep dive uh, into the intersection of digital skills, and the evolving role of HR. So this session will explore how technology is reshaping people management and development practice, from talent acquisition through to employee engagement, and what digital competencies are essential for us HR professionals in this modern workplace. So we'll be learning some really practical strategies that will enable us to future-proof our HR functions and leverage digital tools to drive organisational success in an ever-changing landscape. I should have also said I'm Steve Walker-Whitehead. I'm the Director of People, Equality and Organisational Development at Hounslow, and one of the fantastic vice presidents of the PPMA. So, virtual round of applause for Adam, please. And Adam, over to you.
So thanks, Steve. That's really helpful. Now, as is the way with technology, and given that I'm just about to talk about the importance of it and the benefits, for some reason it's not allowing me to turn my camera on. So it's coming up saying the camera's not detected, despite the fact that I've just come off multiple calls. So I'm not too sure what to do, but I will hopefully be able to share my slides, and hopefully you can all hear me, which is perhaps the most important thing for the benefit of this session. So if you can give me a quick confirmation if that has happened, because
we can certainly hear you, Adam, but no slides as yet.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Barry. I just check this is going to work. Hope it is.
Yeah, got slides, the whole slideshow.
Perfect. All right. Okay. Well, that's good news.
Fantastic. That's it.
Sorry that the videos let us down there, but let me start by introducing myself. So as Steve's kindly said, Adam Stanbury, I'm Director of Employer Solutions at the CIPD. So I have the absolute privilege of working with organisations across all sectors, but have worked extensively across the public sector. And I guess the way that I always think about it is that, you know, it gives me the inside track in terms of being able to play back to the profession by the profession. So hopefully some of the insights I'm going to share today are going to be real life examples of how we're getting to grips with the evolution of HR and what it means. And I guess before I get into that, I thought it's just worth, I'm sure many of you on the call know the CIPD, but I always think it's worth just recapturing a couple of points. CIPD, as you know, has been around for over 100 years. And at our very heart of what we do is about champion better work and working lives. That's our purpose. That's what we believe. And we believe that when we talk about champion better work and working lives, what we do has to be good for both, you know, business, economies, society, and ultimately people. And if we get those combinations right, then we're going to be in a really good place. Now, obviously, when we start to think about the evolving nature of work, that's become ever more prevalent, that we really take the lead in that space as a profession. And now, what you might not know about the CIPD, so I expect many of you will know our purpose, you might not know that our Royal Charter actually charges us with advancing the art and the science of the people profession. And the reason I mention that is because I'm always captured, and I always remind myself that we are working in a profession that is both an art and a science. And it's a very complex profession, and we've got to continue to master our art, and we've got to really understand the science behind what we're doing and our decision making. And I'll bring that to life through today. But I just wanted to capture that because I think that's something that I'd encourage everyone on the call to really think about. What are we doing all the time that can help us advance our own practice and then ultimately the profession? So very quickly, I'll just capture the profession map. For those who don't know, the reason I'm putting the profession map here is because this has now been designed to be evolutionary. What we've got here is a set of skills and capabilities that's been made from us doing horizon scanning on behalf of the profession. So we're constantly looking at what's coming down the track and trying to equip the profession to understand what's the core knowledge that we need, what are our specialist knowledge areas, and what are the behaviors that really drive our practice. And one really critical addition, I guess, to the profession map in recent times, and one that's really relevant to the evolution of HR and what I'm going to talk about today, is around technology and people, and in particular the artificial intelligence standards. You know, we're really recognizing the need for us to get much more comfortable with the range of technologies that exist, and in particular how we start to integrate things like artificial intelligence in a way that optimizes the human experience of work. And that's very much our focus. So it's just an example and a small plug to say, look, if you're not familiar with the profession map, do have a look at it and try and get familiar. And because we are really trying to make sure that that is a set of standards that's constantly evolving. Now, to that end, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the profession's evolving. So when we think about the profession at CIPD, we often think about it through these three lenses: workforce, work, and workplace. They're all very distinct lenses that you can look around the same HR challenges around. And then we start to look at what are the things that are driving change. Now, today I'm going to talk a lot about technological change for reasons that I'm sure will be obvious. But we also got to be mindful that we're operating in a world where we've got a lot of political change, as we know, with our new government and the New Deal and things that will be coming that will impact all of us. We've got social and demographic change that's evolving all the time and constantly changing. We know that we're still coming out of, somewhat the cost of living crisis and an economic crisis, and the impact that that's had on our people and therefore their productivity and ability to be effective in the workplace. We've sadly got a lot of geopolitical crises, which are maybe not impacting directly to say councils, but lots of the citizens that we serve, and of course the relatives who work in our organizations. We're still really trying to navigate our way out of the pandemic in terms of going, well, what does hybrid working look like? What are the requirements of flexible working? And of course, in the back of our minds, we've got this environmental crisis that's placing ever greater demands on us, not least from a position of purpose, and where we want to be to attract and retain employees. So I just wanted to give you that little check-in to show you the kind of lenses that we're constantly as a profession having to navigate. And then if I bring it forward then into terms of work itself, we've gone through lots of different iterations. Change has been a constant for humans and of course for the workplace. And where we're at now is we're entering the start of what I would call 4.0 disruptive tech, so the fourth industrial revolution. And our opportunity is to really lean into it now, both as a profession and all of our workforce, to start to make sure that we're making advantage of it. And a lot of the challenges that we've been trying to solve for some time, let's see if this is the impetus that can enable that. And hopefully, as we explore that over the next half an hour or so, we can see how that can be done. But before I do that, I just reflect a little bit on, as I said earlier, I like to think of it as a CIPD playback. So working across industry, private, public, and internationally across the United Nations, organizations like that, trying to understand, right, what are the key components that we look at when it comes to the future of the profession. Now, I'm not going to look too far ahead here. I'm going to play what I'm hearing from just next year. What do we think we're going to be seeing? So one thing's for sure is we're going to see greater people centricity. So a lot more human-centered design. And when we think about this technological revolution, we're going to need to make sure that our profession is right in the middle of that and leading that, making sure that what we are putting in is human-centered. It's likely we'll have more agile and smaller teams, but we've increased capacity so that we'll have pools of expert project teams, and that actually for the profession we'll be acting as almost the conductor of the orchestra, where we'll be working across a matrix to make sure. I was taken by the point that was made right at the end of the session that I just joined around the importance of workforce planning and the importance of being connected right the way across the business, whether that's to the line or to senior leaders or just to colleagues in areas like finance and beyond, to really drive the success of what we're trying to do from a people perspective. A real focus on organizational value. What are we doing that's all about driving organizational value, and an acceptance and a realization, I guess, that people practice permeates. So sadly we still see a lot of things in the news. There's been HR in the news this morning around things that perhaps we didn't want to be associated with, and we need to recognize that a lot of our practice permeates across the organization, and that employees ultimately are consumers of work increasingly. So we're going to need to think about what does that mean for our future. And finally on that, I think what we're really talking about, and I think Ms. Barry talked about enablement as opposed to leading, but I think what we're saying is that we're going to move from activity to value creation. That's our real focus. Our real focus is about understanding where value is created and how we create it. So that's just a quick whistle-stop tour. And then what does that mean in terms of skills for us? So practically, what does that mean for me? And I think the first thing I'd say in terms of these top skills is that human skills are still going to be right at the front and center of everything that we do. There was a report from the World Economic Forum recently, and I will come back to that in a moment or so. But it still calls out that analytical and creative thinking remain the most critical skills. The ability to communicate, the ability to work in teams, have empathy. You know, these are things that are right at the top, and we must keep and hold them dear into the future. And they're going to be skills that set us up for all of us, both individually and collectively, for the future. The next skill that we're really seeing is this being curious, you know, making sure that we're constantly asking questions, trying to understand more, being open to change, listening to other people's perspectives, looking at things like new technologies through the lens of, you know, how could that work? What do we need to be aware of? Not, oh, no, I don't think that would work. So this skill of being curious, really important. And then we're going to need real strong organizational acumen and strong digital skills. And those are the points that I'm going to focus on for the remainder of today, is how do we build that real strong base in what is now, as I've already alluded to, a digital world. So it's really starting to focus that. And the first thing that I would say in that digital world is that we are going to need, and increasingly are getting, really strong data and analytical skills. Now, this quote that's on screen now is one of my favorites, which is from Daniel Keyes Moran, who's an American writer. And we can probably all relate to it, which is you can have data without information, but you cannot have information without data. So our ability to start to really work confidently with data, but not just work with the data, but actually really understand, back to his point about value creation, you know, what's the insight I'm trying to generate from the data? And then how do I use that in a meaningful way? And that's then starts to talk to areas like data storytelling. How do we tell really compelling stories backed by data? Because we all know, and as I'll go on to, that ultimately, you know, evidence and data beats opinion. And when we start to think about that, then, so building on this real strong data and analytical skills, we need to become much more evidence-based in our practice. So when we think about that at CIPD and we talk about evidence-based practice, data and analytics are obviously one really important part, but we need to look at the scientific research as well and use that body of literature. We need to look at stakeholder perspectives. And when we come on to artificial intelligence in a minute, I'll show you how important it is to really understand the different stakeholder perspectives, and of course rely on our own experience. You know, I'm sure many of you on the call have got years of experience. It sounds like you're already doing some phenomenal stuff across your organizations, which we all benefit from as citizens in the United Kingdom, and that experience is invaluable. So bringing that into it as part of your evidence base is really important. And then working through the A's model, as you can see in front of you, you know, are we asking the right questions? Are we acquiring the right data? Are we appraising, aggregating, applying, and ultimately assessing the data so that we get to a place where our practice we can really stand behind as being evidence-based? And I think we're going to see more and more of that. It's a relatively new thing, albeit not brand new to our profession, but I think it's going to become integral as we move forward in this digital world. And just to then use that as a segue really into technology and what we're looking at in terms of how it's going to shape our future. I think we are already very digitally enabled, and we see it all around us all the times. And as we say there, you know, we experience it in our personal lives constantly, you know, and it has revolutionized the workplace. You only have to think back. I did one of these silly quizzes on social media at the weekend where it talked about, do you remember X or did you remember Y, and essentially showed what age you were at that point. And I was sitting there going, God, yeah, I do remember sending faxes or whatever it might be. And there's no question that technology has optimized the experience of a worker in many positive ways, but it's not without its challenges. So the first challenge that we've got, which is a big one, is, okay, so what we know and what we hear, and we hear it a lot in the press and various places, is that we're in a place now where things like AI, well, is it going to displace all our jobs? Is it the rise of the robots? This is kind of the sort of narrative that's being peddled. And again, I'm going to go back to that World Economic Forum research paper where they said that by next year, AI will have displaced 75 million jobs globally. Right. And that in isolation sounds like a huge amount, and people get, you know, somewhat disturbed by it. But what it then goes on to say, but it's created 133 million new jobs. So you can see that the net effect is a 48 million gain. Now, what we all know is that we need to all raise our digital capability, and that research is also showing us that, you know, top of the list of employers' concerns is this skills gap and making sure we've got access to the right skills. And today, our UK policy has tended to focus on supply of skills and not necessarily utilization of skills. And I guess one of the things that we as a profession need to really start to think about is how do we utilize skills more effectively, complemented with some of these technologies, so that we can really make the step from sort of transactional work into transformational work in the future, and ultimately make all of our working lives enriched. And that's got to be the focus, making sure it optimizes our working lives. And it will mean that as employers and in local council, we're going to need to be more agile in how we reskill and upskill. And are we, I've heard a lot of commentary recently about this kind of move to a skills-based organization and what that means, and maybe we're hiring for experience rather than qualifications, and we're going to need governments to really engage in that debate and make sure they're supporting organizations, but also supporting all of us and people through changing landscape of careers and jobs. So it's really thinking about that skills environment. And then leaning forward, I just want to talk a little bit therefore around digital transformation in a more wholesome way, because I think what we're seeing is that historically digital transformation in organizations has often been led by IT or similar interested factions. And what we really recognize, and I've gone out and spoke to lots and lots of organizations to look for examples where HR's completely taken the lead on digital transformation, and they've not been as plentiful as we would all want. So one of the things in the future is going to be really important that HR lead more visibly and make sure that we are not forgetting the human. If the technologists are left to do what they do, they'll do what they do brilliantly, but they'll leave the human behind. And of course, we know we've got fantastic people expertise to bring to the fore and to augment that and make sure that it works brilliantly. And what that means is that we can start to look at, you mentioned workforce planning when I joined the call earlier. That's a really great example of looking at the lens of workforce planning through automation and thinking, okay, what might we bot? So if you're familiar with our workforce planning model, we talk about the skills that we can buy, the skills that we can build, the skills that we can borrow, and the skills that we can bot, or the roles that we bot, so the activities that we can bot. And I think really starting to think about making sure we're in that discussion. So again, back to this point of putting the human at the center, we're controlling that, and we're really taking a visible lead in digital transformation within our organizations, and ultimately becoming tech savvy people professionals. And that will mean that we're using technology and our people data in ways that improve working lives. And going back to the purpose of what, whilst it's a CIPD purpose, I believe working with so many in the profession, we all are aligned to this idea of creating better working lives for better outcomes. So I've talked a little bit there about digital transformation, and I know AI is the hottest topic in town, and I will talk specifically about the opportunity, also some of the ethical risks and considerations that we need to think about. But before I even go there, I just want to talk a little bit about technology. As I've already said, technology has been in the workplace, nothing new. It's been helping us in our jobs for some time, and it's about the application of knowledge or processes that achieve practical goals, and ultimately they're scalable through being reproducible. Then you've got, if you're like in the onion, you've got automation. So the use of technology to do tasks with reduced or even without human assistance. So that's another real critical part of the onion. And then we move into AI. So AI obviously tries to simulate human intelligence and has problem-solving capabilities and enables us in most cases to start to alleviate some of the stuff that we've all said for many years. If only I didn't have to do that. We've got a real opportunity to say, well, we don't now. That can be we can use AI to do that, and we can work on much more insight-led, value-adding capabilities. And so the critical role for our profession, when you look at digital transformation through that onion layer, is that we've got to start to align technology, people, culture, structure, and tasks, so that ultimately an organization can start to become digitally mature. So, if we're doing this in isolation, it's no different to some of the other things you've been talking about today. We've got to bring the whole organization on that journey, but it's our job to augment the technology with the people experience, make sure we've got the right culture, make sure that we're structured correctly and that our tasks are coordinated effectively. And to do that, we've got to get a new culture and mindset within the profession as we move forward, because we're going to need cultures that support really agile decision making. We all recognize, because I'll put my hand up and say I've been in this camp, that there's a lot of anxiety about change. You know, that of course there's lots of media coverage, there's lots of concerns about, well, what will that mean? And we've really got to face into that and create a culture that supports psychological safety, professional safety, personal safety, so that we can all thrive together and create ways of working where teams come together and they're built firmly on trust. And we've got really trusted teams that will ultimately optimize the employee experience, particularly the digital experience. And that will lead to things like productivity gains. And when you think about the challenges facing so many of you around the need for efficiencies and ultimately doing more with less, productivity gains are going to be a really important part of the future. And then we can work together to design a powerful and positive narrative about the opportunities that AI will present. And that, that is then right the way across our organizations. So we can bring people on that journey to say, do you know what, this is going to take away a lot of the things that you've always said you don't want, and enable you to do some really, really interesting things that create this value. So what mindset will we need to be able to do that, to go into that? Well, the first one I've already alluded to, so be curious. I think we've all got to be curious. We've got to be like sponges. We've got to keep asking questions, keep looking at ways that we can optimize, whether it's a task or an activity. You might have done it for a long time. Could we be doing it better? A lot of people talk about innovation in the same space here. And when I think about innovation, I always think innovation is about every time I do a task, I do it a little bit better. I don't come up with something brand new that's out there in a shiny box, but every time I do something, I try and push the envelope to do it a little bit better. And that then leads itself really kindly to experimentation. We're going to need to test new ideas and approaches without the worry of fear of failure. It will help us measure the outcome of what we experiment to validate new ideas and approaches. And taking that sort of trial and error approach will help us to quickly identify what works and what doesn't. And I think that will then mean that we've got rapid learning, rapid iteration, and ultimately facilitates quicker upskilling. So learning by doing, constantly experimenting. But to go on that journey, we're going to need to be resilient, and we're going to have to have high levels of adaptability, both as a profession and individually as professionals. We're really going to need to draw on that resilience and adaptability and continuous learning. I often reflect on that. If I'm not doing anything to learn about some of these things, then I'm less valuable to my employer today than I was yesterday, and that will continue on that cycle. So this idea of lifelong learning is really, really important. And on that journey of lifelong learning, the final point that I would make reference to is having a real willingness and openness to change. There's no problem with changing your opinion. I heard someone recently say, oh, well, you've changed your mind on that. And that person responded by saying, yeah, and I was presented with different information, a different data point, and that enabled me to change my mind. That's fine. Having a willingness to change is a really important and good human quality. Now, one of the things you're going to need as we go on this journey of digital transformation, particularly in the AI space, is knowing your stakeholder personas. So we all know this. You can perhaps identify yourself somewhere on here, but understanding that across us, and there's no right or wrong here, we've all got different views, but we've got ignorance who are saying this is not happening, fingers in the ears, AI is not creative, not happening. You've got your sort of kids who are looking at going, oh my God, look what it can do. Isn't this amazing? You've got people who are trying to copy this and use ChatGPT perhaps to make a benefit or take IP, or even, in worst cases, make money. You've got others who are in the sort of what I would call dystopian evangelists, which is you see a lot on the papers around, they get robots are taking over the world and the world's going to end and this is a disaster. And at the other end of that scale, you've got utopian evangelists who go, this is just amazing. We'll be curing cancer and everything that goes with it through the adoption of AI. So what you've got to remember, when you've got that variety of opinions and views, there's a lot of diversity of opinion that you're going to need to work. So you're really going to need to understand your personas and go back to that willingness and openness to change. But I wanted to just quickly bring to your attention, I'm going to go more into the AI space now and share some examples of how HR is or isn't adopting AI. It'd be great to get some thoughts on that as well at the end. But this is not new. This is what I found really interesting with AI, is that there was a big groundswell around it, but it's not new. But it perhaps is new for the ways that we work in the office. But if you think outside of the office, you can go all the way back to the 1980s with Deep Blue, which was the IBM machine that beat Garry Kasparov at chess, who was the world chess champion. You know, we're all familiar with Amazon Alexas or similar. You know, we often will shop in places where they're signposting us to the net. You might like this, or you might like that, or using streaming sites like Netflix, where it's making recommendations on your preferences. And actually, I'd say in the main, most of us find that has made our experience of our sort of personal lives more fulfilling. Not always, but often made a real difference. And when you watch children interact with them, and I watch mine, I've got a 9 and a 6-year-old. You know, the way they interact with Alexa, it's just that it is the information source. It's like a walking encyclopedia. Every day it's a question about this, and they're using that curiosity that comes with childhood to really develop their thinking. So I just wanted to give you that flavor that this is not new. This has been around for a little while. And this is another great quote that I love to share, which is from Fifi Lay, who's the co-director at Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI. And it's artificial intelligence, not a substitute for human intelligence. It's a tool to amplify human creativity and ingenuity. And that's the one that I keep bringing myself back to. This is about helping to optimize our lives, and that's what we need to put at the heart of it. And as I said earlier, that's our role as a profession, to really do that and make sure that we are coming in with that people lens. So I just wanted to just pause for a second there, and you know, because there's a lot, we've gone through a lot there, and unfortunately with my camera not working, you're not going to see me in this process. But I wanted to now just take a second to start to go, right, so we've talked about AI, but what do we mean around the key AI technologies that can be used in HR? So what are the things that people can and will, and in the future we're going to see more of? So you've got 3 real buckets, if you like. So you've got machine learning, which is all around providing predictive analytics in recruitment, performance management, and other areas. It's constantly evolving. And you've got the machine learning element. You've then got your NLP, so your natural language processing, which could be doing things like analyzing employee feedback or sentiment analysis, which I'll come on to some examples. And then you've got RPA, which is about the robotics. You know, where are we seeing robotics, and how might robotics start to, you know, I mentioned earlier in the workforce planning space that that bot, you know, is an area that we could be looking at more carefully to go, right, where's the stuff where we're not creating a lot of value, or quite frankly, at the moment, because of efficiencies, we don't have enough people to be able to do those things. But whilst I'm painting a picture of AI having a lot of opportunity, the simple reality is that adoption rates and trends, whilst it's making a lot of noise, and if you go to, I don't know, different conferences beyond this one, people are constantly talking about AI, and I've already alluded to the fact that we now include it within the profession map, because it is a really important part of thinking about how you augment human and technology. Only 17% of organizations have actually implemented AI-based solutions. And I'd love in the chat, if any of you wanted to share any examples of where you've been using AI-based solutions in your councils. It'd be really interesting to hear. I'm sure others would like to. But I'm going to take the opportunity here to go, right, okay, so only 17%. It will rise, they think, back to about 30% next year. But I want to share some examples of where it's being used in areas like recruitment, employee engagement, and performance management, and how other organizations are using it to really drive outcomes. So if we first and foremost start to look at how it's being used in recruitment, you've got examples here from the likes of Unilever and Hilton, where they're using AI and generative AI to do things like CV screening, quickly going through CVs to identify the most relevant candidates, doing candidate matching, making sure that we understand that we're matching candidates to the right job openings, predictive hiring. So I mentioned earlier the importance of deep data and analytical skills, but actually they can start to get into the predictive hiring space, and that will start to predict candidate success and retention. And that is a really important skill moving forward. And of course, you can use things like chatbots. Just this morning, I was reading CIPD's latest output on our talent survey, and it was showing how many candidates, really significant numbers of candidates, who are being offered a job, accepting a job, and then we don't hear from them again. They're calling it ghosting. And thinking of ways that we can, without using lots of resource, can keep touch points on the pre-onboarding process and beyond, a really innovative way of delivering some of your recruitment and talent plans. And then if you start to look more broadly at looking at things like your engagement and retention strategies, a lot of organizations, this one is particularly Google, which I know we're all familiar with, but they're using sentiment analysis. So really looking at their employee feedback to improve their strategies and sentiment so that they can start to, and this is the one that I find really fascinating, use predictive analytics for turnover. So you can start to look at people in similar roles and look at what the characteristics are, maybe at a point where they moved on to a different role or perhaps became unhappy in their role, and use that to predict future leavers over time. But also, of course, you can start to use it. I've seen it more recently in an organization where you can start to predict your talent and your succession plans as well. So predictive analytics is a real tool that's there that you can use AI that will give you benefits that perhaps we can't see when we're working across big systems like many of your councils are. And then it can do things like personalized employee engagement plans. So develop tailored plans based on the personalized experience of work. So, we all know now, and I mentioned it earlier, that we've got this challenge and skills gap, but we also recognize that we've got to be able to, we're in a real talent war. We need to be able to create those personalized experiences and connect with the purpose of our organization to want to work with us. And AI can really help with that. Equally, it can help with performance. So, we're seeing it with Adobe, General Electric, and others, looking at how AI is used to build continuous performance feedback systems. So, through nudging and data analysis, and back to this skill of data analytics, really getting this continuous performance, goal setting, tracking, and then it ultimately provides development recommendations, which I think is something that we could all benefit from, and can leave us then to do some of the more human skills and creativity. But why does it all matter? So that's where I guess I would go, is why does this all matter? And that is to say, look, AI has the potential to change all of our worlds. If someone came along and said to you today that we can take away the 20% that consumes your time that you don't enjoy, and actually free you up to really bring the brilliant skill set and expertise that you've got to the fore, I think most people say, yeah, that sounds really interesting. How do I do it? And I think sometimes we're steering away from it for reasons that we haven't demystified it. We haven't really looked at it. But the simple reality is that it's got the potential to change our working world. I'm sure we're going to see more and more of this as we go through the coming years, and that the rate of change is unprecedented. So when I talked earlier about the behaviors, you're never going to keep up with, none of us are going to keep up with the speed of change in AI. But what we can do is develop the behaviors and the skills and mindsets that I talked about earlier, that means that we can stay on top of things, so we can understand how we augment it with the human experience of work. So it is going to be about those really human skills, about analytical, critical thinking, curiosity, that will enable us to be successful, and that we're all going to have to accept that we need to change, adapt, and really work with our colleagues and ourselves to reskill, upskill, and put lifelong learning at the forefront of everything that we do. So that's kind of given you a whistle-stop tour, and it is a whistle-stop tour of the opportunity that exists and how organizations are already utilizing it. And as I say, it'd be great to see in the chat if there are examples that you've got of your own that are implementing AI solutions. But we also know that we've got to make sure, back to this point about human-centered AI, that we're adopting it ethically, and that's both in the AI and tech space. So when we think about technology, we know, as I've already said, and the reason, although my camera's let me down today, so this is perhaps not the best example, it would have been better if it hadn't, but we know that technology can improve productivity. We're all sat in various places around the United Kingdom and perhaps beyond, and we're having the opportunity to converse in this way. We know that we can use it as great communication tools. It really has enhanced job quality in many cases and provided good work, flexible working. I'm today in CIPD's head office, but recently moved out into Cheltenham, and that was an opportunity given me because of technology, and therefore my work-life balance has improved, as have many. So we know that technology can improve our working lives. However, if we don't get it right, and if we're not evidence-based in our practice and bad practices creep in, we know that it can really undermine our return on investment. It can affect people's well-being. and therefore their performance. And ultimately, as soon as that starts to happen, it's highly likely that retention is going to become an issue, and that you'll lose valuable skills either through quiet quitting or by leaving the organization. So really important that we understand that. And if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about that and some frameworks to start to think about, well, how do we make the right decisions about implementation of technology, there's a link there on the slides, which I'm sure will be shared, and it's worth having a read through and just get familiarizing yourself with some of the decisions you need to make to be responsible. And when we talk about AI and responsible AI, as I said earlier, if we leave it to the technologists, then it's going to be done to us, and we don't like things being done to us. No one does. And that we've got to make sure we owe it to all the people that work in our organizations, and we owe it to society at large to make sure that AI is being adopted responsibly. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the practice of designing, building, and deploying these AI solutions in a manner that empowers people and businesses, fairly impacts our customers, or in your case, your citizens, and ultimately society. And it enables us to then, with real trust, scale AI with confidence. We know it's driving better outcomes for the people that we serve. And I think that is a really important part. And of course, with anything like this, any new technology, there's the emergence of AI regulation. And for those who are quite well read in this area, you will have seen that the EU recently have brought in the first sort of regulation around the use of AI. I'm not suggesting that there's going to be lots and lots of regulation wrapped around this, but we have also seen Sam Altman from OpenAI in the Senate talking about this and advocating for it, because in his words, he felt that we were moving away from that human-centered principle that it was created for. And that's obviously going to be even more reason why we've got to lean in and be curious around it. And so a couple of questions that I'll leave you with, because I'm conscious of time and I want to leave some questions, and I've got a bit of wrap up to do. But what would be really great, maybe pop it in the chat again if you get the opportunity, is given what I've just shared with you, given what you're reading and what what opportunities do you see with this digital world that we're moving into, and what does that mean for our profession? But equally, what challenges are you seeing, and what do you think it will mean for you within your respective councils? So that's just something that you may not have time to pop in the chat, but it'd be a good one to take away and reflect on, maybe talk about with your peer group, just to say, okay, what are the opportunities we see, and how can we start to wrap this into the employee life cycle? And then just bringing it towards a conclusion, I thought it was probably worth sharing with you our latest data. So CIPD have a range of capability assessment tools which look at capability across the board. And then we look at that and go, right, what are the key areas that we're hearing from across the profession that are most in need of capability enhancement? And I thought I'd take the opportunity to share those with you, because this is true evidence-based practice. So the top one actually was around reward. So really understanding the ways that we reward people in the changing world of work, and lots of different ways now of people working, that our reward strategies have got to evolve. Again, talked about talent, but I think it's also about how we start to use more technology in our talent management processes. I've talked a lot about being much more analytical in the way that we work and use data for information, and that, no real surprise, comes out high, as does this whole area of technology and people. So all the standards that we talk around technology and people is one of the areas that people feel least confident in. And then strategic workforce planning, which was so great to hear when I joined the call, so many of you talking about it. So I just thought I'd share that with you, because lots of organizations do like to hear about, well, where are the gaps, and does that resonate with our sector? In our sector, do we feel like they're the kind of gaps we're seeing, or actually is it something different? Do you say, well, I don't recognize that? And it's always an interesting point of reference, I think, for you. And bringing it to conclusion, so what does this all mean? What does all of what I've talked to about mean for you as a professional, and how you need to evolve in what is now clearly a digital age, and how you prepare yourself for this change? And what I would say is, first and foremost, it's about future-proofing ourselves. So how do we remain current and be effective in our roles? And it's through upskilling, it's through being curious, it's making sure that we understand what's going to be expected of us. And we are increasingly a curious profession, which is great. And now we've got a real opportunity to accelerate that and make sure that we put ourselves at the forefront of organization decision making. You know, we start to look at how we can apply AI across the employee life cycle. I'm not asking, you know, I don't think people are going to be ready to make great leaps. And I know there will be limitations to what you can do in your respective organizations. But even if it's just getting a bit more familiar with some of the generative AI solutions, you know, that really is an opportunity waiting for you. You know, help build capability across the talent pool within your organizations. So future-proof yourself, but also think about the skills, as I've said earlier, about the need to address the current skills gap across our economy for this digital world, and provide the guidance. And you know, I mentioned the ethical deployment. You know, we've got to put guardrails in place. We've got to get policy in place. And when we think about things like policy for AI and generative AI and responsible use of technology, it's quite different to policy in other areas of our profession, because, you know, in many areas, our profession writes policy over a 3 to 5 year timeline. This is changing all the time. So we're going to need to get a different approach to how we create policy around it and make sure it's very iterative. And then the final one is about leading with the right culture, one that is future-proof, curious, innovative, and as I said earlier, experimental, and that ultimately the future of work is rooted in both artificial intelligence and human intelligence, and one that augments the two, that really creates powerful outcomes for us all. And that's how I'll leave you, is just to say that, you know, it's never been a more important time to become a professional in terms of optimizing your professional skills. So on this call today, I suspect we've got experts from all across, as I've said, the UK, but there's never been a more important time to move away from gift answers and say, no, do you know what? I have to apply my situational judgment. I have to keep building my body of knowledge and skills. I have to commit to CPD. I know we're really busy, but we've got to commit to it. And what that will lead to is real confidence in our identity. It will build our confidence and commitment, and we will be able to deliver on that social and ethical responsibility that in the organizations that you work in is so important. And that's me. And I'll just say thank you for listening and welcome any questions.
Adam, thank you so much. Wow, that was absolutely fantastic. And we've got some comments coming through from Julie, Ellen and Derek. Thank you in the chat already, and Amanda. Colleagues, we've probably got a couple of minutes for comments and questions. I can't see hands, I'm afraid, because my view isn't quite right. So anyone could urgently pop the questions, any questions or comments in the chat, as colleagues have been, that would be really helpful. So can you see the chat, Adam?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a question there from Bethany.
I'm just gonna come up to right, because there's quite a lot of
Yeah, you need to scroll up just a little.
yeah. So Bethany, right, what particular platform would you suggest for these AI solutions? When I think AI, I think about ChatGPT or so many AI. So how you use. Yeah, I mean, look, first and foremost, I'd really recommend something like, not necessarily ChatGPT, but getting familiar with one of those generative AI tools. So, you know, there's other ones as well, like Bard, that you could go and just get familiarized with. And as I say, it will really help with some of the basic stuff. Now, you can't make the mistake of thinking it's going to give you the answer. It's not. That's where we've got to bring our human element to it. But it will definitely give you a great start for things like, you know, writing policy, for example. It can give you a really great starter, and then you've got to overlay that with the contextual elements of your organization. The other thing is obviously Microsoft Copilot. You know, it's there to help us. It's a tool that's increasing its capability all the time. So I don't think you need to look, you know, too far at this point. It's just about being, you know, I keep using the word curious, but just being curious around some of the tools that are in the mainstream that could really improve our practice at the moment.
Fantastic, thank you. And just very quickly, one from Amanda. Oh, hello, Amanda. It's my colleague, Amanda. Anyone leading on this right now within our sector?
So that is a really good question. So that's one that I guess I'd like to lean in a bit closer to the sector on and find out a bit more. So that was one of the things that I mentioned in the talk was I'm seeing it across the public sector, but not necessarily yet. I did talk at a conference recently where there was a couple of local authorities who were starting to dip their toe in the water, but I hadn't yet seen any of the examples. So the examples that I gave, I appreciate, were some of your larger brands, but it's one that I'd love to talk about, and maybe it's one we could pick up offline with the team at PPMA, because it'd be great to get some case studies and bring some of that to life for you all.
It really would. So time has run away with itself and with us. So listen, thank you so much again, Adam. You've really got me thinking about that balance between, if we're to understand technology as being the science, what could the art become, and what does our future value add look like? Because that is bound to be different and led by those kind of human skills and that curiosity that you've talked about. And the other thing I would say, you've given me a really helpful narrative this afternoon to help me articulate to the team what the potential opportunities of this whole thing are, which is just brilliant, because I've got my transactional services coming back in-house imminently, and they are worried and anxious about artificial intelligence, but I think it's just going to make their jobs richer. Anyway, I could talk about it forever. I think so thank you again, Adam. It was really, really brilliant, and everybody seems to be appreciating you and your presentation in the chat. Yeah, virtual round of applause for Adam. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. If there's any questions, I'm really happy for my email to be shared, and I'm happy to help anyone and signpost them to things. So just to say that, and final apologies that for some reason my camera didn't work, but as I say, really happy to pick up questions separately as well.
That's fine. I'm sure our continued relationship with you will enable us to see what you look like in the future. Anyway, listen.